Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Scott Scher, Associate Director, Cyber Threat Intelligence at the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. Scott, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Ben. It's always great to get the opportunity to talk to fellow colleagues in the industry. Good to see you again because you've met at a few conferences as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's start off. Can you share a bit about your journey so far?
sure, yeah. So as you kind of introed, now the associate director at Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, where I'm helping build and lead that function, really kind of matured over the last 2 years that I've been there. Prior to that, kind of running through, at the private intel side for a little bit, kind of working there doing traditional strategic finished intelligence reporting. And then really the cool like highlight in the beginning of the career was helping, stand up New York City Cyber Command and stand up their cyber threat intelligence function, which was really awesome, right? I was the second person hired for that team and really got to help, build everything from the bottom up.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. A lot of work, but a lot of good work. So
Usually the fun stuff is. So I'll ask you to think back on a couple key life events, those major moments that you kind of look back on. Any of those that you can think of that really kind of shaped your leadership style?
honestly, a lot of that goes back to really early childhood and life. My brother played a pretty big part in kind of helping raise me and do things like that. And there was always this idea, right, of hey, leadership comes through sacrifice, right? And leadership comes through taking responsibility on whether you are prepared for it or not. And it's really about, when you can, as I've learned, post that and actually being in leadership positions, meeting your teams and meeting your colleagues and friends where they are in their career and in their journeys, right? It's not always, hey, this is how we have to do it and what needs to be done. Sometimes, right? That's the point of a leader, right? Is to also say, hey, give me all that feedback and then make a decision. But it's also coming and being like, hey, what are you best at? How can I use, how, and you say it in a weird way, but how can you use someone on the team, right? What's your skill sets and can we best apply those?
How about mistakes? Can you think of any mistakes that led to personal growth?
Of course, I think, and tied into like the intel world and like the work side of things is, I think a big mistake in the beginning and even still now, right? I have a hard time sometimes kind of challenging this is, for lack of a better word, like being like an intel like CTI purist, right? Of like this is how CTI is done, and you can only do it this way, and here are the frameworks, and and very hey, we are a professional industry, which we are, and we do try to do a lot of work on making it as scientific as possible, right? Like quantitative and really like building in the process and the methodology into it. But also, and the mistake is expecting non-CTI folks to also view it that way and be receptive to that. And I think sometimes saying, hey, to that same point of, meeting people where they are, is sometimes you need to use different words. Sometimes you need to kind of go in and instead of telling people this is what it is, or, a lot of the mistakes is trying to get relationship building, right? It's coming in and being like, hey, instead of coming in and saying, we're here to collect intelligence requirements, tell me everything you need. It's really more about building a relationship with those stakeholders and getting to understand them and what they do and allow them to kind of influence you and kind of drive you rather than kind of pushing your stuff down.
So do you find that gets harder or easier as we move? I mean, when I started, we didn't have intelligence requirements. We didn't have these frameworks. We were mostly making it up as we went along. And now we kind of turn around and all that stuff is behind us. And people are coming into the industry having learned the frameworks and learned all the tools. How do you navigate between those two worlds?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the typical CTI answer, right? It depends. And I think the answer is, I think the answer is it's both, right? I think it makes it challenging, like to my point, right, is I've learned all these things. I kind of work through them and, I've built a lot of some of these, internal processes and methodologies. I want to use them, right? I want to, highlight them. I want to work through them and do all that. And I kind of want to sometimes jam them down people's, throats, for lack of a, it's a better way of saying it. But it also kind of, I think, makes it easier because you have things to fall back on, right? You have things, especially to your point, right? In the beginning, you were kind of just flying by the seam of your pants, right? And just being like, hey, we think this is a good assessment and we think this is right. And like, here's all this stuff and kind of just like, hey, based on doing it and understanding and kind of walking through now, which is something I like to, especially expressing to teams and stakeholders is looking at us as, justification for the decisions that get made, right? Take a pretty practical case, right? Hey, an alert comes in, security operations center is looking at it. They need to make a decision on, block, don't block, take action, don't take action, right? Whatever that might be. And we as the Intel folks have or will be providing what I like to look at as that cover, right? You made a decision not to act on something and then say something bad happened or something not great happened. It's, well, why'd you make that decision? Well, we had all this intel from the Intel team. So like we as cover, and then when people come back to us and say, CTI guys, why did you, make this decision? Why did you make this assessment? We go back to all that quantitative, all that methodology, and we could say, here's every single piece of information we used. Here's where we got that information from. Here's how we applied it. Here's the assessment, language we used on it. Here's the scoring. Here's, admiralty code for the source reliability. Like, right? Like there's all these cool frameworks now that we can go in and say, here's the math behind why I said something wasn't a threat or was a threat, and and that. So I think it gives everybody that sense of justification and cover. So again, it makes it hard because you want to use all that stuff, and some people may not want you to, but it also makes it easier because you have something to fall back on.
So that's interesting how you're walking through kind of the decision process, how you get in there. One of the things I find fascinating is like looking at the decision process with the time component. What, who, knew, when, and how that translates to, the decisions that are made and then justifying or questioning the decisions later on. Does that match your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. It's who knew what when, but it's also, I think, also like the piece, right? Intel needs to be timely, right? Like there's components of what good intelligence kind of looks like. It's actionable, it's relevant, it's timely. That's great. Give me something, relevant and actionable, but it's too late. Didn't really help, right? I think timeliness is super important, right? I think if anything, I mean, actionable and relevance is probably the most important, but timeliness really does matter, right? And I think you're right in saying, that definitely comes out in those conversations. It's, well, the Intel team saw this on a Tuesday, they wrote a big report on it, they sent it out on Thursday or Friday, and then something, happened on Wednesday, right? And it's like, whoops, we missed it. Or, hey, we tell someone something and then all of a sudden there's no action, or whatever it is, right? And whatever that might be, or the reverse, right? It's, hey, we told people, hey, this is a big deal, go do something, and they did a bunch of actions, and it turned out, hey, whoops, this wasn't really relevant, it was something else that we didn't have all the information on, and this was really, some threat actor that wasn't interested in us at all, and we wasted cycles, right? So timeliness definitely happens. I think there's a balance, right? It's about getting the most relevant and actionable information to the stakeholders in the most timely manner as possible.
You mentioned your brother. Are there any other individuals who really shaped the trajectory of your career?
For sure, I would say, I mean, there's always like personal people, right? And that don't really need to, go through them too much. But also, right, mentors in the industry, right? When I was in grad school at CEPA over at Columbia University, professor was really kind of instrumental in helping me understand how to, navigate, one, the like community and things like that and the such, but also something that I really liked was we didn't agree on a lot of things sometimes, right? I was coming into the world of like, hey, very like active defense, offense, right? Like, hey, this is what it is, right? It's all like we have to be like doing stuff and like we have to hold people accountable and like all the things that you hear now, like right, like hey, we got to start holding people accountable for their actions and nations and whatever it might be. And it was a lot of, hey, defense wins, right? Like defense is, not only just a defense win, but it's, hey, maybe we're actually doing a good job at defense, right? There hasn't been casualties based on cyber, right? Like, I mean, you can kind of draw lines, but there hasn't been, direct. So it was a lot of that. And to be honest, since I've left school and been more in, the industry, I find myself taking his perspective quite often in arguments. Just again, something I've kind of learned. There's been some other professors as well. I would also say a lot of my colleagues, particularly at New York City Cyber Command, I know we used Valtigo quite frequently in there. So I'm sure, like others from our team, you've had the pleasure of interacting with and things like that. But yeah, like my team there, my leadership there, really. But then my team, right? I think my team did the most, right? They really kind of helped build what we did, right? Our team there was really impactful.
What would you say is the most valuable lesson you've learned from a security incident or operational failure?
Let's say security incident. And I think the thing that I've learned the most is perseverance, right? And I think the ability to continue the actions, right? Like there's a lot of work that goes into security incident, and there's a lot of, long nights. There's a lot of questioning yourself and the things that you did either prior or during and after kind of thing. So really, and I think the perseverance builds a lot of the patience, right? Like the patience to be able to do it. It also builds the resilience to be able to say, hey, this is worthwhile. And yeah, maybe there was a failure that got us there. Maybe it was an intel failure. Maybe it was a security failure, hygiene failure, whatever it might be, right? But I think being able to stay with it and really go through it has been I think that's the greatest lesson from dealing with those things. And again, your team kind of really matters, right? It's, hey, you're in there with them and you're all there kind of working towards the same goal. So it's, hey, whoops, maybe, I was responsible for tracking that alert and I kind of dropped the ball, and the team kind of helps you go through it, or vice versa. So
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you even find yourself dealing with, like, one of the things I've learned in those processes is, all right, we went all the way down this particular rabbit hole and it didn't help us any.
yeah, and it was the wrong route, right? Especially if you're talking, remediation, or, something that, colleagues of mine kind of really hammered into my head, right? The idea of like key severability points during an attack chain. Maybe we as the intel team told people, this is what we think is going to happen. Like, go over here to the right of it before that they get there, and like that's where you should expect to be able to eradicate and do all that kind of stuff. And then the threat actor does something else, right? And it's like, whoops, this was, analysis, right? It's not prediction, it's, assessment and things like that. We don't know what's going to happen, but it's what we think is likely. So yeah, so we've definitely, sent people down the wrong holes before.
What do you mean you can't see the future?
That's actually interesting, right? I think not something I've been thinking through, right? Is the perception is you can see the future, right? It's, oh, you are going to tell me what's going to happen before it happens, right? And it's, if you're wrong, really bad. If you're right, nobody pays attention. So yeah, no thinking, but it's like, I don't know, right? Like baseball, things like that, right? Like you could be right, if you batting 300, you're, one out of, five, three times you get up, you succeed at your job. It's one of the few jobs where you could not succeed most of the time and still be considered really good. It's like, well, maybe we can reframe some of how, we as the Intel team talk about our work and how people kind of view our work, to be like, hey, this is really forecasting, right? Like this is, what we think is likely. This is a, analysis and assessment. It's not prediction, and kind of reframing it, and that might help. Yeah.
You need a tagline like the financial folks do, past performance is not an indicator of future success. Or
Yes.
what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your job?
I think that one, obviously by roles and things like that, it's changed, right? Working for the city of New York, like obviously the most rewarding thing is helping protect the like citizens and like the people who live in New York, live and visit in New York all the time. So like there's a reward there because, hey, if something were to go bad and something serious, this could potentially be, lives, on the line. Thankfully, that was never really the case. We didn't have to like deal with that too much. But again, that's kind of rewarding there. The other, I think the biggest element then just like across like career, like just being in this industry and doing this type of work. Again, it's the people you get to interact with, right? It's the folks on your team, it's the people you're working with. They like having that team kind of mentality and that ethos that really comes from it. I think CTI of, all of the cyber functions is the biggest team sport, right? Like a lot, like assessments, you're not, hey, analyst one, you go, here, go read some stuff, go get some collections, and then go write a report and make an assessment on it and see you, and you do this and you're over here, and everyone's kind of doing things siloed and individual. Like that can work on, a SOC, that can work in instant response. Like, hey, you're the forensic guy, go do forensics. Hey, you're, go over here in the networks and looking at network telemetry, like go do that. You can kind of parse everything out. Everyone kind of can go do their thing and then come back and be like, hey, we figured out what's going on. The Intel team, a lot of it is that back and forth, right? It's that interaction. It's, hey, it's that challenge and audit kind of function, right? It's, hey, I said this was a high threat. Well, why did you say it was a high threat? Did you think about this? Here's, did you use structured analytic techniques, right? Are we sitting in, running through alternating competing hypothesis and saying, well, what else could it have been based on this same information? Or what information do we not have that would be changing this, right? And if you just have one person looking at things, that kind of, right, you get biased, you know, all the things that, pitfalls they kind of fall into. So it's really being able to work with your team because you build such a close relationship with them.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like it's a really good tie-in to, like, diversity of the team. Just having the broadest set of experiences and skills and backgrounds in one place.
Absolutely. I think that is extremely important, right? Diversity of thought is probably the most important thing you can have. Diversity in other areas as well is, equally as important. And like that brings different perspectives, right? Diversity of life, experiences, diversity of, socioeconomic, experiences, things like that, like difference in education, all of that, right? Like I think that's all super important because it brings all of those perspectives because that's what you need, right? And I know we were kind of talking before, like in school, like, hey, taking different people's arguments and things like that is I very much on my team tend to play the contrary position at all times, even when it's counter to the argument that I actually think is right. Even if it is my argument, I will then, if no one else takes the opposite point, I will then argue against myself just to have that, there. And that is something like just a skill that I happen to naturally be good at because I kind of like to challenge things. And that's kind of always been my personality. And then something that I very much have cultivated is I'm a firm believer that you can't really think the things that you think if you don't know the opposite of it. And you need to know the opposite of what you think is right, even more sometimes than you need to know your side, right? It's, and whatever it is if I say something is A and someone else says it's B, if I don't know every in and out of B, how can I truly say that I think A is right? Or how can I
How could they think B is the right answer? What went into that?
exactly?
If you can see their side and still think you're right, that's a more powerful
That
place to
makes it
be.
more powerful, right? It's the same, right, when you get into, like, the lawyer language, right? Like, it's I need to know these rules inside and out so that I know exactly how this rule could be applied, but then I also know how it can't be applied, right? And there's ways to go around it, and it's like, "Well, this is exactly what this says, and this is how I can do this other thing over here without falling afoul of that,"
Without
right? So,
violating it.
yeah, so these are all important things. So, I think having that ability is really good.
What is your approach to building trust within your team?
One, as we've really kind of just like talked quite a bit about, right, on a lot of these answers, my answer is always, hey, the team, the team, the team, right? Trust is imperative to that, right? So I think the way to build that and the way that I've built it is through transparency, right? It's, hey, this is who I am, this is what you're getting, this is what I'm saying while we're in a group here is the same stuff I'm going to say when we're, one on one over here or I'm with someone else over there. So I think transparency so everyone kind of understands who each other are and can build trust there. Communication, right? Being able to candidly communicate and allow, if you're a leader, allow those who are, either equal to you or, below you to voice their opinions and then to actually take their opinions into consideration, right? It's, hey, like we talked before, right? A lot of my leadership style is, hey, I'm more of I'm a leader, but I have advisors and I want everyone to give me input. I don't like to make decisions by myself, right? And I don't know if that's a good thing or right or not, but the way I kind of do it is I want everyone to tell me what they think, the way they want to do it, everything that's better, why my way may be wrong, whatever. And I'm going to take everybody's data points and I'm going to put it together in my head and say, okay, here's the decision that I want to make. And then make my decision based on that. And I think giving your teams that opportunity builds an extreme amount of trust because they know that they have direct influence, right? They have input. And you may not always agree, and I may go back, or the leader may go back and say, "That's great, you guys said all this stuff, or the team said all this, and we're doing that anyway, right?" Because that's the leader's job, right? And that's how I've judged my leaders: is do they give me the opportunity to be that counterpoint, right? As long as they do, then I feel empowered by them, and I feel trust in them.
How do you create space for your team to speak up?
A lot of it is kind of what we're doing here, right? It's treating to the degree that is, professional and makes sense in a casual setting, right? It's, hey, yes, there's people in charge, whatever, but you have that voice and pretty much very vocally make that known, right? Hey, come to me and say, like, this is a place for you to say those things, right? Like, and I think voicing that, a lot of it sometimes, right, dealing with employees who are, not as vocal, right? I know that I have the luxury of being kind of, confident enough to step up and say when I disagree and things like that, and not everyone does, and that is definitely a luxury that I've been granted through my life and through my experiences. But so it's kind of eliciting that out, right? It's when, hey, if you're in a meeting and I mean, I tend to be the one who talks a lot, but stopping myself from saying and stop and being and asking others, right? When I work on, projects with my junior analyst, right? A lot of it is, hey, I'm giving you this project. I expect you to be in charge of it. And what that means, right? Hey, if you're in charge of this project, even if there are people who are above you, even myself, and we're working on it together, you can tell me what to do, right? Like you should be telling me like, hey, or holding me accountable if I, miss the deadline or, whatever it might be, or like, hey, yeah, I didn't get to write that section, or I didn't get to edit that thing or whatever it might be. And it's like, hey, this thing's due, like you got to get on it, or like, hold people, accountable for that. So it's a lot of empowerment there. I think it's also a lot of, building that again, when once you've built that trust is allowing them to have that freedom.
Awesome. All right. CTI is technical. There are a lot of technical details you need to understand. I'm curious how you balance the need for, maintaining that skill set from a technical perspective, at the same time, building and managing your skills around being an effective leader.
My slight counter would be, yes, CTI is technical. However, I think it's more so analytic than just technical, right? I think, and I'm the only reason I make that distinction personally for myself is I'm not and don't come from a technical background, right? I didn't do a computer science degree. I didn't, I don't really do much coding. I don't really deal with the like keyboard in lack of a better term there, like, and that was by choice, some by mistake, right? Of hey, maybe I should have focused more on that, and I do think that is actually true. I think understanding that the technical piece is super important. But there's a lot of what we sometimes call technical is actually like analytic, right? Using those quantitative systems, using the methodology, using, doing a link analysis, like doing all those things, like being able to understand how that works is more analytic than just technical, right? But playing that difference, right? Like how do you keep that skill set and then also like be a leader and do all that? A lot of it is one through continued, education and practice and et cetera, right? It's hey, it's not always just sometimes you have to be the one to go in and do, right? Like sometimes, hey, there's a bunch of analysis that needs to be done, like go in and work on it. But also it's similar to kind of how I was just talking before, right? Like giving ownership to, teammates and analysts that you're working with, but it's working with them on that, right? So it's again, as a team sport, this isn't, it's not just, hey, here's your assignment, go do it. It's we're doing it together. So there's a lot of opportunities to keep those skills, fluid and functional. And then to the leadership side, I think that helps then drive leadership, right? If you're doing it from a leadership perspective, you're still kind of exercising both muscles there.
What is your definition of success within your team?
I think, right, there's all of the metric stuff, which I don't really necessarily consider like success, right? I think there's pieces there. I think success is really about the team and about the impact it can have, right? All things we've kind of talked through of what a good team looks like, how the team functions together, how are they, safe? Do they feel safe in their space? Do they have, the trust and all of that built in? That is really my main version of success is this is a team that is doing the thing that it is built to do. It has all of the processes that are necessary to empower that team to do what it is built to do. And then the people who are doing that function feel good about what they're doing. And they feel, and that could be, impact that they have in the organization, right? Hey, we're built in and we see the value that we're bringing. It can be, part of, hey, I just feel like I'm doing good work and I'm empowered to do so. And I feel trusted and et cetera. So I think it really just success is again. I think the human part, right? We're on a podcast called Human Element, right? I think the human perspective is the way I value success, and then obviously you get the normal success stuff, right? Like, hey, are we actually helping drive security decisions and security posture at wherever it is that you are?
All right. Is there any daily routine that you found helpful?
I mean, not a super routine person because I'm not structured enough for that for most of my life. I've been kind of like here and there, but with that being said, so I'll say two things. One, I will say I've learned when you're in not a very structured and routine place, it's actually a lot harder than when you are in something that is structured and has all that. And I've always been the one that being like, I just kind of do whatever I want. I don't want to process document and like I don't want to deal with that. But then being in places where those things didn't exist and being like, oh, there's no process here. I have to, and then being like, I gotta build it. It's like I really, really want this. So I've gotten very much into the sense that like, as much as I don't like it personally, it's actually super useful, and I really do like it. But in terms of like an actual routine, and again, I think this and why I mentioned the process stuff is I think it drives from that, right? Like having a daily routine of here's the process for how we do intelligence from through like the intel cycle, right? It's, hey, here's our planning stage, here's our feedback dissemination feedback stage, right? And it's actually having a process for going through that. And then I would say the daily routine is, hey, come in and review collections from the day before, right? Like what's come in, what have you seen, kind of work through that, and then start doing your processing and analysis, right? It's, hey, take all of that in, ingest it, do something with that information, and then depending on what that information is, turn it into, analysis and intelligence.
If you find yourself, again, unfocused, overwhelmed, how do you get back on track?
Yeah, and I mean, this obviously happens, I'm sure often, right? Even for myself, right? It happens quite often, right? Is sometimes it's about stepping away, right? Taking a
Yep.
break. Breaks are super important, and that's hard. One, if it's a break, like I'm really bad about vacation. So, but sometimes that stuff is super important. I'm just really bad about it. I'm like, I don't have anything I really want to do. And it's like, well, why wouldn't I just work? Right. Like, and I kind of lose that. But particularly if you're working from home, right? I'm luckily now I'm home, but also in the office a lot. But, going out and with the dog in the backyard and like kind of decompressing, like getting away from stuff is I think super important. But then also it's again with that concept, right? We talked about through like lessons learned from security incidents, right? It's that perseverance piece, it's that resilience piece of understanding and being able to step back and say this has value, or if it doesn't, evaluate what's going on, but finding that value and merit in the thing that you're doing helps with allowing you to keep going.
How do you balance getting your team to take the time off they need if you're not great at it yourself?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm not going to say forced vacations, right? But encouraged vacations.
Inverted death march?
Yep, it's like, okay, like, like, deactivate and, like, access, like, "Sorry, you can't access the computer now, and we'll turn your accounts back on in a week." Like, no, but it's really encouraging that, right? Again, it's a lot of being vocal and communicative to the team and with the team of, "Hey, this is what you should do." The expectation, like anytime you want time off, anytime you need or things come up, right? Emergencies, things like that, right? I've had, analysts being like, "Hey, message me and be like, hey, I'm literally on a plane right now. Something just happened. I have to go." And it's like, do whatever you have to do. Work is not important. And it's like, "Oh, well, I brought my laptop with me." It was like, put your laptop away. Don't worry about it. It's like, well, we have a deadline. It's like, who cares? Deadlines can be moved. Someone else can step in, right? Like that's, the our job as a team, right? Is to cover for each other. It's do whatever you have to do and don't worry about it. And then when they come back, people are like, "Oh, thank you so much for that." It's like, no, you don't need to even thank for that. That is an expected and that is an obligation for me, like as a team member to say, you have something going on, take care of it and don't worry about work.
That's powerful. That's important. Someday I'll tell the story when that happened to me. But is there something you do as a leader that you wish more leaders would do?
I think yes, and the answer to that really is it's not one thing per se, but it's a piece of kind of what we've been talking about. It's really that empowerment piece. It's that understanding that people have a skill set and allowing them to use that skill set and not feeling like you need to either tell them what to do like in that sense, but more like trusting them to be an expert in the thing that that they're best at, right? And it's saying, hey, if you're the long form strategic report person, then I know, hey, here's your thing. Go write a long form report, and then not need to be like, well, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that, or like go in there and kind of be on it. It's really more, and then take that input, right? And I think that's the main piece is it's take the input when someone on the team says, "This isn't the right way to do this. This is how we should be doing it." Know that you've hired or you're working with and trained the right people, and they know sometimes more than you do. And I very much it's highlighting that skill, right? There are people on my teams who are very much so more organized and structured than I am. So when it comes down to that, it's, hey, when someone's like, "Hey, this is not the most efficient way for us to do this," or, "Hey, we need you as like the leader to rein yourself in and like follow our rules and like get in there." And it's like, okay, cool. Like, better than I do.
That's awesome. What is your signal that you've got an effective team culture working, and how do you cultivate that culture?
I think my signal for that is when the team feels comfortable in challenging, and particularly challenging me, right? If I'm the leader, right? Challenging leadership, challenging the status quo, challenging the even if it's the task, right? And I think that is also something like when I really feel like that someone is empowered is if I'm like if I it's hey, we got a task that comes down from our leadership, and this happens quite often, right? It's hey, tell us about this ransomware group and we want to know about it. And then it's like, wait, stop. And it's like, hey, someone's asking me about SamSam ransomware. It's 2021. Why are you asking me about something that the people who were responsible for this are in prison right now? Right? Like they're arrested, and you're asking me to give you an understanding of how they operate and what they do. That doesn't make sense, right? And to be and if it's like, hey, why are we being asked? It's challenge. And say, hey, why are we doing this? We shouldn't be doing this. Sometimes it's the boss said do it, so do it. And that could be me. I try not to be in that position, but sometimes it's, hey, we're being told to do it, so we're doing it kind of thing. But knowing that they feel powerful enough to challenge it and say, hey, this is wrong. This is why I think it's wrong. Okay, fine, I'll go do it. Right. And I think the way to cultivate that is everything we've kind of talked about, right? It's that communication piece. It's being, back and forth with each other and giving them that sense of responsibility.
How do you approach difficult decisions?
I try to gather as much information as I can without, and I say that, but I'm also very much an like instinctual decision maker too. So like it's kind of weird, and I have a lot. If you've noticed, I have a lot of like, oh, I say things over here on the right, but then I'm also here on the left. But it's really, hey, and I like to have conversations, right? I like to sit down and talk the decision out, and that's really why I said the team is the most important, especially having a supportive team and a team that feels like they can support the leadership, is going in and talking through the decision. What should we be doing? And getting all that advice and all that input, and then sitting back and making that decision. Sometimes it's based on facts. A lot of times it's based on, well, this is kind of what feels right. And particularly in a difficult decision, depending on what difficult means, right? It could mean something that's just challenging and hard, but it could be difficult in something that is, it takes a lot, right? It's a hard decision to make, right? It has impact and things like that, like direction of team and things like that, where it's like, ooh, if I make the wrong decision, this could be impactful, kind of thing. A lot of those I tend to make a little bit more feel than a little bit more qualitative than quantitative sometimes, but it's after getting a lot of quantitative data in.
What is your go-to advice for new people in the field?
My go-to advice is, I think, a little bit. So a couple bit things, but the first thing I will say is, and I think all analysts need to kind of learn this, is don't get attached to your work. And what I mean by that is your products, right? Your outputs, particularly if you are doing like traditional Finnish intelligence writing and like report writing. Don't get attached to the words in there. Don't get attached to the structure. Don't get attached to what it is, because one, your team, and this is actually a good thing, everyone's going to edit it and review it and challenge it and go through that. Yeah, so it's challenging. It's not getting attached to that work product because it's going to change, especially once sometimes you give it to someone, especially if you're giving someone, talking points to a leader to get in front of people to speak, or a presentation that someone else is going to give, like from above you. They're going to potentially make changes, and they might be changes you don't agree with. There might be changes you don't like, but it's just the nature of it, right? There's no way to stop that from happening. What I will say with that, right, is, hey, when you have your stuff, you always have the back end, right? The justification piece, as we talked earlier, right? You have all the things that, hey, this is what we actually said, right? If someone comes back and is like, oh, leader got on TV and said this, whatever it is, and it's like, well, actually, that's not the assessment we made, right? It got changed.
This is how they were briefed.
Yeah, this is not how that person was briefed. It kind of changed, all of a sudden, something that was, a low threat is, a critical existential threat, right? It's like, whoa, we didn't say that. Or, hey, we're getting attacked, we're seeing a million cyber attacks a minute. And it's like, well, actually, that's not what we said.
Maybe you see it in a million packets.
Yeah,
but
like that's not what we said. We said, there's some traffic and this is how much traffic is going by each time, right? Like things like that. Other little bit of advice that I would say there is get comfortable in obscurity, right? You don't always know what's going on. You don't always have all the information and all the data, and you need to get comfortable in making difficult, hard decisions in that. You need to be able to understand what you know and what you don't know. And I don't really love the unknown unknowns, but yes, there's unknown unknowns, but you kind of have to account for the fact that they exist. But it's really just being, comfortable not always being able to say definitively, I know this answer, which, right, that's why we have estimative language in our industry, and it's things like that. And the other thing I will say is process, right? Process and structure, which we kind of been talking through. It's learn that, right? Learn to like it, learn what it is, learn to do it, the methodologies, all that kind of stuff, because that is your guide, right? Like that is your stick to hold that holds you up, right? Like everything is really dependent on having that really firm.
How do you approach mentoring the next generation?
Yeah, I think very similar to how, approach the idea of working with your team and on your team is one, it's teaching them, it's being again, meeting them where they are, right? Where is this person in their career and their journey? Is it are they brand new and they don't know anything? Are they, a junior analyst that you just hired and you're here to train them and it's part of your job to also give them the advice and mentor them and all the things we've kind of been talking about here? Are they someone that's in school and you kind of direct them towards, well, hey, here's the things maybe you should focus on that might get you into the industry, like all those kind of things. But it's really that's really the style and the approach is really kind of meeting them there, and then it's again empowering them, right? I think the idea of things being a two-way street are very important and more so than just like important. I think it's really good, particularly for the person who may not feel like they're in the authority position or the whatever it might be, right? Mentee, mentor kind of position, letting them know that their input and like the conversation you're having, that you're getting something out of that, right? Because you learn from those situations too, right? Plenty of things, like I never think that, oh, because someone is new or has doesn't have as much experience or whatever it might be, that they don't know something that I don't know. That's like I consider myself to be smart, right? Like for lack of a better, I kind of like the British way better. I really like the term clever because I think that means something a little different than like just traditional intelligence or smart. But there are a lot of people who know a whole lot more than I do, even about the things that I know a lot about. But being, clever and being, like smart is being able to understand that, hey, this person might know something that I want to know. So like giving them that ability to feel like they're bringing something to the table is really important.
Yeah, definitely don't want ego getting in the way of the opportunity to learn something.
And I've actually just had this conversation a couple of days ago with my junior analyst. We're working on doing process documentation and just writing a lot of stuff. And and her and I are working through all that. And there was a, hey, this isn't sometimes, I feel like we're on a call and maybe it feels like I'm saying a lot of stuff and that person's helping me write things down and it's, well, I don't see the value that I'm bringing and it's like, hey, time out, right? And this was the conversation. It was, all of this is invaluable, right? One, it's not getting written down and worked through if you're not here helping, right? Again, I'm kind of bad about that. So like I have it in my head, but getting it on paper sometimes is harder. But even more important, it's a lot of all of these concepts that we're working through. I have some ideas in my head, but like what's on that finished paper is a product of your input. Like you have directly influenced the way that this team will operate and does operate based on these conversations that we're having. And sometimes they don't realize, right? It's, hey, especially like you asked before, right? My decision making process, not just my decision making process, it's my work process is very communicative. It's very like, let's talk out what all these ideas are and how they work and, what works here and, what flows into what, et cetera. And a lot of that stuff I don't actually have in my head until after we've had the conversation. And then it sounds like, oh, I came up with this whole thing, but it's like really actually most of your questions you're asking, your ideas, it's a lot of asking them, what do you think we should do in this situation? And then having them tell me stuff and then me think about it for a little bit and then tell them back. And then it's like, "Oh, Scott said that." It's like, "No, Scott didn't say that. You said that. I just said it back to you." So
Are there any books, resources, podcasts, websites that you recommend to the younger folks in your team?
yeah, this is always a hard one for me to answer because I'm like, I don't really remember them and things like that. But in terms of, books, and I'm sure you might even see it on the shelf behind me, but Structured Analytic Techniques for Analysts, that is, the book that, everyone should have. And it's really more of a manual, right? It's not a book that you would read. It's like, hey, have this on hand to be able to do these functions. Like, websites, things like that, right? Like training, there's always all right, like, hey, go to, the threat informed defense site, right? And like go through miters, things like that, like, cause that is all super important. And that's like the next framework and strategy for like how we should be doing things in the industry. Obviously all the miter stuff, podcasts like this one, things that I would say Honestly, a thing that I really go to and really tell people is reading reports, right? Like, as much as we all like don't love the commercialized versions of vendor reporting, there's still a good resource for learning what intelligence should kind of look like and getting a sense. And it teaches you
Or what to avoid.
that's also true, right? Like, hey, start especially, and I've had analysts that I've been teaching do exactly this, which is also awesome from a leadership perspective and training perspective. Is be like, hey, we sit and we go through our process and we talk through these things and we read them and we go like, hey, all this methodology, and then they go and read some vendor report that we even sometimes vendors that we're paying for, and they read the report and they're like, this person said, hey, this was a threat, like X level of a threat, and that was it. And then they moved on and went to the next sentence. And it's like, they didn't tell me, they didn't give me any justification why. They didn't like say how confident they were. They didn't do all that stuff. It's like, I don't feel like I trust this. And it's like, great. Like, that's exactly what I want you to take away from this, right? Like, that's really good. In terms of, some other things to kind of, give people, I'm trying to think, I'm trying to look even at my tabs on my computer right now to see if I have anything open that I might recommend. But it's really, again, it's the frameworks, it's the process, things like the diamond model and all that stuff. I'll even say, even like reading kill chain stuff, even though it's not, as much of a thing that gets used as much anymore, but the concept is still super important. So yeah, I mean, again, just reading industry reports, reading even, if you follow people, on social media and LinkedIn, whatever it might be, that are, a little more in the public face of our industry, the things that they're saying, even when it's just comments on things or commentary, things like that, those are all always really good. And then, obviously whatever, researchers and things like that are putting out.
So as we move up the ladder, there are usually a bunch of transitional phases, things about our role and our life change. What would you say is the hardest transition you faced?
I think there's, a lot of hard things throughout all the transitions, but I think the hardest transition as you go up is navigating how to manage up, because right, I think that's a lot easier when you are lower on the when you're right, like, hey, I'm analyst, or I'm, senior analyst even, right, on the team, and you're managing your team lead, right? Like that. And then we've talked about what that kind of looks like from my perspective, right? The leadership dichotomy there. And this, I think, is a lot easier than saying, hey, I'm the team lead. I'm the director, associate director, whatever it is, and I'm reporting to either, depending on your organization, there could be a lot of levels of like just titles. But let's say, right, you're the lead of the Intel team, you're reporting to the head of a threat management function, or you're reporting directly to a CISO who then like or you have enough visibility that you're even sometimes being in those board or like being called upon to help with those, maybe not directly reporting to those. Managing that relationship is significantly harder because they don't know the ins and outs of like what Intel looks like, what Intel is, how it functions, all that. And their time is much shorter, so like you don't have as much interaction with them. But it's also they're getting stuff from so many different places, right? How many times have I been in, organizations where it's like CISO and they have their like CISO group that they talk to and like their communication with their chat, and then it's all of a sudden, hey, I saw someone in my chat posted a bleeping computer article about this, whatever it might be, and freaking out. And it's like, this is like and it's like, oh, I need you to do this. And it's like, cool. Yeah. Or, hey, that is like the threat actor responsible for that has never targeted the industry that we work in ever. Right? Like, now, again, that doesn't mean they won't ever, but it means, at least from an emergency perspective, this probably isn't one. And managing that, and in particularly because the higher up you go, the more, and I don't like to say that the ego gets in the way, because I don't think that is like always the case, right? I think there are some people who maybe aren't great leaders, but that's just the way it is. But more so, like across the board, is they're in a position of pretty significant authority, right? Like, they tend to either have people who just default to that, right? And say, oh, I can't tell you bad things, or I can't disagree with you because I think you're in charge. Or they don't expect that as much because of their role, right? Or they get a lot of pressure too, right? The closer you get to the very, very top, the more that's kind of pushing down. And it's like, yeah, I get it, but I'm getting, hit by the CEO, and we got to like, I don't have a choice either. And it's like, how do you manage that relationship?
That's interesting. Do you see any trends developing in the space that are going to change how we lead our teams?
Yeah, definitely. I think one, and I'll say, and I'm not going to say good or bad trends, right? I think they're just trends, and if you can navigate them, they're good. And if you can't navigate them, they become bad or whatever. But I think one trend is, and something that we've touched on, right, is the idea of a little bit more of professionalizing CTI. And I think that will very much help with leadership in particular, right? It's if these frameworks are in place, if these or they're adopted universally across the industry, like, hey, this is the way that we name things. This is the way that we do analysis. This is what is supposed to be in there, right? And I didn't really mean to say name like as in naming conventions for threat actors, but I know that's kind of where we ended up. But really more so like how do we internally do things? And like here's like a framework for building that. And I think that's gonna empower a lot, and I think the trend is going more towards being, more of a scientific professional industry than it is just a pure, "Hey, we all just kinda do things our own way." Things with, like, threat informed defense, like, as a strategy and a concept for, like, how to run a function, because that, like, builds out of broader than just CTI, right? That's not a CTI thing, that's an entire threat management concept. So I think that is moving, good, and again, that will help with leadership because it'll give you things to fall back on, it'll give you ways to train, and, it'll give you that framework and that base. I think whether we like it or not, artificial intelligence is coming, and it's here, it's going to influence, and it could be sort of good if it's figured out and done the right way. Because I think, and some of my colleagues may not love hearing this right now, but I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I don't love it, but I do see ways to integrate it into a program, right? Like there are things that it can do, right? It can help with collections. It can help with, I don't want to necessarily say it'll really help with processing, but it can do a lot of that work. And to be fair, we were doing this before artificial intelligence existed, right? Automation has been a thing for a long time, and it's super empowering, right? It gives you the ability to, instead of having to like tirelessly go through things manually, you can get things out, and then you need to like go in and do real analysis work on that information. But it could also hurt, and this is where I think the leadership piece is super important around this is getting your handle on it, especially as we just talked, right? Like I said, the hardest transitional challenge has been leading, managing up. The leadership at the top is very bought in, and especially they get bought in by the vendors and all the hype and all the this is going to solve all the problems, and we don't need people as much anymore. So, and it's like there's a world where if you don't have a control over, or you haven't figured out the best way to actually use artificial intelligence AI to help you do your process better and more impactful, it's going to potentially replace a lot of people. And I know that's not a great thought, or it's not a thing that a lot of people, particularly for a long time, I was like, oh, AI can't replace Intel analysts. Like, can't replace the analyst. Well, it can, right? Not in a good way.
We may not like the result.
We may not like what happens, but it can and it will if we don't embrace that this technology exists, and we as the Intel community don't build the way to use it, someone else will, or marketers will, or whatever. They will figure out a way to say, look, this tool will do all the link analysis for you. It'll read the report, it'll pull it together, and it'll give you insights based on all these other reports, which is what we say we do, right? Like that's the exact process I say when people are like, what do you do? And how did you come to these decisions? Well, I took all these reports, I synthesized all the information, I put it in here, I plotted it, I made all these connections, and I said, oh, I read 6 other reports about this same group. Here's all the information I know about that. Here's what I think is going to happen next, right? AI is real good at doing that. So if we don't figure that out, it will hurt us.
It will be done for us.
It'll be done for us, absolutely.
When you are hiring for your team, what are the critical qualities, and how do you screen for them?
Yeah, this is, I think, not only a really, really good question, this is a challenging one to answer, right? Because there's so many things, right? That are right, like skill sets, all that kind of stuff. I think one, it depends on the role, particularly, right? How's the team functions? Are you an Intel team that's split into like a strategic and operational or tactical kind of like, and you're split there, you're like what we might call technical and strategic or executive, whatever it might be. And then it's like, what skill set are you actually hiring for, right? That matters. But more so, it's that idea of, is this person going to, and I don't like to say culture fit because that has like a potentially negative connotation to it sometimes in some places, but it's really more of a, what I look for is thinking process. And that's how I kind of get the idea of culture fit, right? It's, hey, here's an interview, here's questions that I'm going to ask that may or may not even have answer or like right answers, right? Like most of them don't have like a right answer. It's more of a, well, how are you going to answer this? And then even more so, it's, well, can we talk through your answer to be like, well, why did you do this? Right? Like similar question you asked me, right, is something I typically ask in an interview, right? Is, hey, tell me a time when you and your team made an assessment that turned out to be wrong, right? And then on top of that, it's okay, hey, based on what you know now, or like at the after effect, would you still make the same decision? If not, why? Right? Like why yes or no, right? And because I want to know one, I don't want to see, oh, can you tell me a time you made a mistake or like you failed, right? Like how did you navigate that? It's more about why did you make the decision that you made originally? It was wrong. Would you still go back and make that decision? And that's really to get at, well, because from an analysis perspective, right? It's, hey, I have a certain set of information. Based on that information, I made the decision that I made in that moment, which means even if I was wrong, I was really right because I had the information, right? It's this weird thing, right? And I tell people all the time, like, I'm never wrong. I'm just not right sometimes because it's I made a decision or I took an action or did whatever it was based on what I had available to do that. And that was and I used the sound process for getting there. So I was right in doing what I did, but it wasn't the correct result because whoops, I missed something, right? There was something there was information I didn't have, whatever it is. Those are the things that I want to get out of, a candidate is, and those are the type of the ways that I get that, right? Questions. And then it's also to that same piece of, empowerment, et cetera, is one, I like to ask them if they have questions. That's my first like barometer on like, ooh, is this a good candidate or not? Is okay, I opened the floor to you. Did you ask me questions? Then did you ask me good questions? Right. And I know there's no bad questions, but like, did you ask me questions that are like, oh, this is something I'm glad you asked, right? Or is it just like, hey, can you tell me, like, right? But at least ask me something, right? If I turn to a candidate, the candidate's like, no, I think you answered all my questions, I'm good. I'm like, I mean, I'm not gonna say that negates them from the qualification, right? But it's definitely a thing I'm like, "Well, why didn't you have questions?" Right? And this is what I do to my team all the time because 'cause I've had it kinda blow back, well, not blow back, but been like, "Hey," train people and then be like, "Nope, I got it, no questions. Cool, go off and do your thing," and then come back and then be like and then me go through it and be like, "This is wrong. Why is this happening?" Blah, 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 and go through and then being like, "Well, I didn't know this," and then I'm like, "Well, you told me you didn't have questions. If you have questions, you gotta ask me questions, right? Like, feel safe to ask questions."
That's important. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today. So before we wrap up, if people want to follow along with your work, is there anywhere to go?
Yeah, limited. Unfortunately, I'm one of those people who don't really use social media and never have, and that's probably a whole nother conversation we could have talked about around like why I didn't do that. But LinkedIn is the best place, right? Like in terms of like a public forum, right? That's where I kind of I don't do a lot of commentary in there, sometimes here and there, but really it's the network there. It's really more about visibility and things like that. I try to when I see good reports I try to flag them and and things like that. It's where a lot of times when I'm telling people who like kind of mentoring and things like that, it's like that's definitely the best place to engage with me because even if it's just hey we're connected, it's I'm gonna repost jobs. I'm gonna places that I think are worthwhile. I'm gonna flag it. Oh, someone made a good comment on something. I'm gonna kind of and I might respond right, but it's really more so about the visibility that people will get based on interacting with me rather than like what value they're going to get from like following me kind of thing because I don't think there's too much there. So
All right. Awesome. Scott, thanks for the great conversation. Learned quite a bit. Look forward to keeping in touch. And thanks for coming on today.
awesome, Ben. Thank you so much for having me, giving me this opportunity and platform to kind of talk through my journey, but even more important than my journey, right? The industry and the field that I'm pretty passionate about.